Welcome to Free Media. I'm Robby Soave.
And I'm Amber Duke.
Well, the biggest story of the week is undoubtedly Nick Shirley, an independent conservative YouTuber who released a documentary on welfare fraud in Minnesota. And in the video, Shirley visits Somali-run daycares that don't appear to be operating, but he claims still received millions of public dollars. Let's watch.
Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going. What do you guys think about the fraud that's taking place here in Minnesota?
I don't think anybody is enabling fraud to happen.
Hold Governor Walz accountable for this.
What was this money spent on? 1.26 million. What was that money spent on? There aren't any kids.
Answer the question. Are there children? There's no children inside this building.
Democratic Governor Tim Walz is under fire for letting so much fraud occur under his watch, but Walz hit back at his critics, saying that they were making white supremacist attacks on the Somali community. Let's watch.
This is what happens when they target communities for their own benefit. This is what happens when they scapegoat. And this is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy.
So it sounds to me, Nick, that Governor Tim Walz is saying that you and others that are out there trying to expose this, you're doing it because you're white supremacists. What is your response to him?
Yeah, Tim wants votes. There are entire apartment complexes where white people have been pushed out of these apartment complexes because Somalians have taken over and they're inside of these towns like Minneapolis where they can go get votes from these people. And if you have 100,000 people that will vote for you because you're going to enable and let this stuff happen and because you're going to call a white person racist for calling out facts, this is what's going to happen to a state like Minnesota.
And a reporter for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune reports that the daycares visited by Shirley are closed, but still receiving payments. So this went mega viral, millions and millions of views on YouTube, the clips of it on Twitter going mega viral. So yeah, big story. We've obviously already knew that there's massive fraud underway under Tim Walz in Minnesota. The fake charities and such things that had been set up, but this is specifically about daycares. Now, I think the facts are a little confusing and in dispute because some people are criticizing the documentary saying, well, he wasn't there the hours during they were open. I've now seen local reporters say they were all closed, but then, of course, one of them tried to bring in a busload of children anyway, but it's closed. And they're still getting paid regardless. So I would like to see further reporting, but it certainly doesn't inspire confidence when the sign for the daycare center is misspelled, the Leering Center.
Quality Leering Center.
Rather than
the
Learning Center.
And that was one of the ones they claimed was closed. And then the person who made that claim walked it back and said, actually, they decided to reopen this week. And then that was the one that had bussed in all of the children to try to make it look like it was above board. The reactions to this are insane. You had a Politico reporter suggesting that they should have shot Nick Shirley under stand your ground laws for knocking on the door of a public business.
Yeah, that's only a slight exaggeration. It was a really bad tweet
what
he said. He was like, well, what about stand your ground? You can't just shoot people for knocking on your door.
Right.
Even under a stand your ground paradigm, which I don't think applies in Minnesota.
Yeah, and then there were the people pointing out, well, he was there at 1:55 and the daycare opens at 2 p.m. And it's like, okay, well, that would be when people were bringing their kids to drop them off then.
Right.
And also what daycare is open from 2 to 8 p.m. That also kind of cuts against the idea that this is a legitimate business, that you're not even operating during normal childcare hours, which are during the workday.
I mean, it could be an after-school daycare program, but my understanding from is they weren't licensed for that. They were licensed for during the day. And they were still receiving payments. There's nobody there. So that needs to be looked into. I think that's probably the bigger part of the scandal. I've seen a lot of people saying, where has the media been on this? Which I actually thought too. I'm like, why has this gotten no attention? It took, this guy to, blow the lid off it. But I have now actually found, looking at it, and Eric Boehm, a reporter at Reason, found some stories in the local news like 6 years ago about these daycare centers not having anybody in them. I think this actually goes to show less so media criticism and more so even when someone reports on these things, the bureaucracy is so bad that there are no changes to a system that was, if not exposed, at least suggested to be fraudulent like a decade ago.
Yeah, one of the things that we uncovered or sort of brought back to the surface was a 2016 This American Life segment where they had gone to a town hall with Congressman Tom Emmer from Minnesota, who is now number 3 highest ranking Republican in the House.
Right.
And his constituents were begging him, stop the Somalians from coming in. We have too many, our community's changing, they're committing fraud, things are getting out of control. And he was like, this sounds like racism, guys. We're just going to keep bringing them in.
A lot of things
like,
have
too bad.
changed. Yeah, I can't imagine a Republican accusing someone of.
And now he's one of the guys leading the charge to fight the fraud, but it's a little convenient.
Yeah, Tim Walz. I don't think. Obviously, I'm not a fan of his anyway. I don't think he's found a convincing excuse or way out of this. His reaction that if you're mad about this, it's white supremacy is, I don't know who that's going to persuade.
No, and I mean, the problem is a lot of the Democratic politicians who are defending the Somalian community and by extension the fraud are people who receive donations from the Somali community. Maine's a great example of this. They have a similar fraud scandal for a company called Gateway Community Services that was supposed to provide medical care to disabled residents and was just making up home visits to get reimbursed for through the state Medicaid system. And there are 3 Somali lawmakers in the Maine State House. All of them collectively released a letter going off on Trump for calling some Somalian refugees garbage. But 2 out of the 3 actually had directly worked for Gateway Community Services during the time that they are accused of orchestrating the most fraud.
Yeah, I do think, I would rather keep the focus on, I'm sure, because people maybe in defense of the Somali community of Minnesota will say, well, there's lots of fraud being perpetrated in lots of states, in lots of communities. And I'm like, well, that's probably true. Unfortunately, there's probably lots to uncover that people have not done a good enough job on.
Do I need to tap the per capita sign?
What's that? What's the per capita sign? Oh, how many? Yeah, the proportion. Well, look, I mean, Somalis who have nothing to do with this, they should be outraged too. If they're taxpayers, and should be, probably are. It goes to show, in my view, that just the level of corruption and bureaucracy and just millions of dollars going to public programs that don't exist, that no one shows up for, going to things that are obviously that neighbors are pointing out are boarded up and windows are closed and signs are misspelled and no one shows up and they just collect check year after year. My favorite thing in the video was that old guy who's helping Nick Shirley or whatever, who has the most Minnesota accent I've ever heard in my life. So Minnesota, it's like borderline Canadian.
Because he was one of the local reporters that I think
Where
has
are
been following
the
this
kids?
for a long
Where
time.
are the kids?
So cute. And then he got stalked by some of the Somalians who started following him in their cars and showing up in the next business to yell at him and tell the people not to open the door.
Well, there's the confusion. There's a woman who's convinced they're with ICE.
Right.
This would be too clever a scheme, I think, for our law enforcement to perpetrate. We're independent journalists. Come on out. Yeah, but this is a story that is going to be talked about for a long while still, and I don't know, it could doom Tim Walz's re-election, maybe. I know it's a blue state, but this is a pretty bad PR for him.
I mean, they've already indicted over the past few years, I believe, 70 to 75 Somalians in the Feeding Our Future scam, which was the child SNAP benefits and things like that. So separate from the daycare scandal. But then there were some local judges that were actually vacating the convictions with no explanation why. So it seems like the corruption runs really deep.
More free media right after this.